Today's project is Valentine's Day themed because it's coming up quick. So I decided to make some wood conversation hearts. It's an easy project. If you just want a few basic tools, you can do it. And I like a lot of places do sell wood hearts, so you could just do that portion too. I am chronically single, so Valentine's Day is not exactly my favorite holiday. So I decided this year to show a little self love. So mine are self love conversation hearts. I have finished the project, so I am going to enjoy a glass of wine, and I'm going to use my candy budget on some Reese's peanut butter hearts instead of conversation hearts and enjoy the wood ones instead. So join me as we make some wooden self-love conversation hearts. We have to design our self-love hearts. Step one, we need a heart. So I'm just going to use a basic heart graphic that Cricut has. Heart, and it's nice, it's free. And I know we want this to be about 3.5 inches because our board is going to be 3.5 inches. But the nice thing is we can make them a little bigger if we rotate this 45 degrees. So that way this edge and this edge will be flat on the board. That's a little less cutting. So you can see that this is now square. So we'll do 3.5 by 3.5. Now we have the perfect sized heart for our 1x4. We'll take this back to 0. Let's make it light color so you can see. Next is you got to come up with your sayings. So I got a couple examples here that I'm doing. I've got about 12, but I was trying to find a font that was very clean lined to feel more like a conversation heart. So I ended up using the Four Season Home Decor. It's a Cricut font because I'm using my Cricut to do these. So then I had to figure out, send this back, arrange, send to back, what size to get it to fit. That's about right. So what I did do though is I went and created all of my words and took the biggest, got it sized to fit. So for example, this one, figuring out then what size of font to use. So like say it was 48, we use 48, or say 40, say we needed 42. So some will be a little smaller, some will be a little bigger. It appears that was about what I had used. It was about 42. And every font will be a little different depending. So now we have that. Now you have two choices when you're making your stencil. You could either, or if you choose not to, you could either print these just as is and use vinyl on them, or you can do your stencil. I'm doing a stencil to make them feel more like a legit conversation heart. So I chose to make rectangles, or you could just make a bunch of hearts and stencil that out. So shapes again, pick out a rectangle, get a little bigger, about that should work. Okay, I'm gonna make this silver, send the back. So now we can see our stencil. If you want a little bit more, that way, because you want to have a little bit of a gap around, so that way when you're painting, you have a little bit of space to work with. Then we want to go ahead and align center. Now I'm going to warn you that you will lose when you go to slice the original font. So I would make a copy of this so you remember what font you used, hide it over here, and then you go and slice. Because now you can see that the original brown, it's just a basic cut, and this is a basic cut. And I discovered that when I went back to figure out what font. Luckily, I remembered. So, words of wisdom. So now we have our stencil. And when we get it, we'll be able to just center it on top of our heart. And I made them about the size, so I just made it so I had everybody lined up about there. And then you can just center it. Now, there are 2 steps for this. The first one is I will hide all these because I don't need them right now. Then I just need my heart. Because I'm cutting it on a scroll saw, I want to make it a pen so it draws. I'm going to go ahead and rotate that back to 45. And then to make my life simpler, I'm going to square. I'm going to make that 3.5 by 3.5. Send it back. I'll make it a light color to see. Align, center, then I attach. So that way when I go to draw,
it will draw my heart and then it'll cut this off. So that way when I put this on my 1x4, it fits perfect and then I don't have to go try to trim or figure out how to line it up best. So that is what we'll do for creating our drawn heart to go next step, which is out to the shop to go ahead and get this drawn and cut.
For our heart project, I have already, when it came out, and used a miter saw to cut 6 little squares. They're 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches because a 1x4 is actually 3.5 inches wide. Nominal lumber is always kind of interesting to remember what all the dimensions are. So I have gone ahead and put some tape on top of our wood. It's because I use a spray adhesive and I don't want to get the residue on my wood. Then I got this random box to keep the adhesive off my stuff. So I just spray it. That way the overspray stays in the box. Take it out. And then now we've got, put it away, our template applied onto our wood. So for the rest of these, I will go ahead and just trace out this one onto these and just keep tracing it. That way this will be like my template as I go through and cut all these. So next up we'll go ahead over to, use the bandsaw because it's a pretty simple cut, and don't forget safety, glasses, dust mask, hearing protection, and dust collector to keep yourself safe while you're cutting, and watch your fingers. So we'll move on to the next step. We now have all of our little hearts cut, so it's time to sand. I have an orbital sander I'm going to be using, and then I have 2 different grits of sandpaper. I have that is a 220 and a 180 just to give a nice light sand, the front, the back, edges, just to get a nice smooth heart. So it's time to sand. Don't forget safety. As you can see, we now have all of our hearts cut and sanded, so now it's time to paint them. I'm kind of going with the whole theme of the conversation heart, so I picked out like the 6 colors. We got a purple, a blue, a pink, yellow, green, and an orange to paint them each. And I'm just using the paint I got from Menards, or this one actually came from Lowe's. And for the letters, they're usually like a hot pink, so I have a hot pink I'll do when we get to that stage. I have my brushes and my water, so now we're going to go through and paint each heart. I'll just do one for example, and then we can come back and get the rest. We'll start with the pink. Paintbrush. And these are where I usually do one side than the other. There we go. Get the edges. I like to do the edges first just because get that nice good coat on it. Then we can get the top. I figure one good coat's good because that way you can see a little bit of the wood grain, because that way you know they're actually wood hearts. Set that down. And I do the edges first because it's a lot easier to paint, because that way you have something to hold on to while you do them. The pink is done. We'll have to let that dry, then I can flip and get the back side. So then I'll go through and get the other 6 colors, flip and get the back side. Then once these are dry, we can come back and add our stenciled words.
First step is that we are going to go ahead and take this and pick out what we want to do. I will go ahead and do all 12 of these I had come up with, but I really only need 6 because I create 6 hearts, or you could do front and back. But here's just some of the sayings I said. So you click make it, they all line up perfectly, and you go to continue. Then I go ahead and pick my stencil vinyl, and then for my blade I do more depth because it is an older blade. Now we're getting our stencil vinyl cut.
We now have our hearts painted front and back. As you can see, they're good to go. And I did lightly sand them to get any like loose paint or anything off, and then wipe them down. Next up, we gotta weed our stencil vinyl. So the difference between stencil vinyl and stencils versus standard is with standard you weed what you don't want, versus with stencils you weed what you do want to show. So as you can see, I have all of our, whoops, let's pull this off. I did do more pressure because I know my blade's getting old, so. So this is where you have to really watch out for like the inside of the A's, whereas before you try to get rid of those. So like for example, this E I would get rid of. And this is a pin pen weeding tool, and they're great. Like here's an O. So as you can see, we are getting rid of the letters themselves, so that way when I go to stencil this onto our hearts, that will be what is the hot pink paint. So I'm going to go ahead and weed all of these, and then we will come back and apply the stencil. We now have our stuff weeded, and I actually went ahead and worked a little ahead and got some of these applied. So I do, even for stencils, still use transfer tape because you have like the middle of the O, the middle of the letters you have to get over. So we'll go ahead and get this stencil put on our pink heart. Stick it on. Get it real good. This is just a squeegee I got. We have a stencil. So to find the center, sometimes I'll kind of halfway fold it in half, just a little bit, pinch the top, which is right at that line actually. So for these, what I've been doing is, since it's a heart and it's symmetrical, I can put that at the like the center of the heart. Then I've been kind of lining up by top of my stencil to make it so that it's a lot easier to get on. Really get it down. There we go. I will save this to use later. Perfect. We have our stencil on. Now, for painting a stencil, sometimes you'll get some bleeding, so it's always a good idea to go over it with something else first. There's a couple different options. You could use the same color paint, but since I have like 6 colors of paint, I didn't want to do that. Or you could use Mod Podge. And since I have satin paint, I'm using satin Mod Podge to go over it. So I will go ahead and put a little on this. It's a nice thin coat. You don't want too much. And what that does is that it will weep under first, and it'll be clear, so when you do the paint, you won't get as much bleeding. You get that much sharper line. Another option is polyacrylic too, particularly if you're using stain. I'm going over paint. Okay. That we have. Now I have worked a little ahead, and I'd already put the Mod Podge on this. And you can see it's starting to dry. So now we'll go ahead and paint this one. Just a nice thin coat. It's painted. Now I could go ahead and, this is one of the first ones I did. So we'll go ahead and take off the stencil off of this. Now we did have a little, hold a little bit of the actual wood off, but that's sort of light. Grab this to get the centers off. But you know what? Conversation arts in real life aren't perfect either, so you've got this. I will go ahead and finish this up, but I am really happy of how this project is turning out. I said that was just a little wood. I can go back and fix it or just leave it as is. It's up to you. It depends on how much, but you gotta remember to believe in yourself. You are enough, and make your own conversation, self-love hearts this Valentine's Day, and love yourself and be positive and think about what you need to hear personally. I hope you will take on this project and try your own versions. If you do, share. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe. It's all much appreciated, and have a great day and happy Valentine's Day.